Okay, so I believe I have started the recording. Great. And I'm going to share my screen. Okay, can you all see my screen? And is it presenting in a normal manner?
Yes.
Thank you, Dr. Great. And let me see who's with us right now. We're waiting for Dr. Berlin also to join us. We'll give it another minute and then we'll get started, everyone.
Just before this meeting, I had a crash course with Annie. She was telling me how to transfer because I use Apple, and so
Okay.
she, oh, this is different. So I had a crash course.
Well, it looks like you came across on top.
Hopefully, look, I had to go grab a drink. I was fretting here.
Okay, well, we want you to stay focused. All right, looks like we have Sam with us. Welcome, Sam. All right, in the next 30 seconds, I will begin. And you may want to go on mute if you are not talking. Hey, Sam, how you doing today?
Good. How you doing today?
I'm good. All right, I'm going to begin. First and foremost, I want to welcome you to the scholarly book reading sponsored by Department of Criminal Justice, College of Behavioral Social Sciences, Team CJ, as we coin ourselves. And we're excited to have our guests with us today. And if you did not know, March is National Criminal Justice Month. And thus far this month, we have kicked off or launched the National Criminal Justice Month with a keynote address by Katie Ray Jones, who is the president and CEO of the National Domestic Violence Hotline. We've had our own alumnus, Mr. Devin Walker, present his documentary on trauma, highlighting the impact of violence and homicide on families in Baltimore City and its effect. Recently, Dr. Berlin, Dr. Anderson, and I attended the Academy of Criminal Justice Sciences National Conference in Las Vegas. We had a great time connecting with students as well as our peers who reflect research, policy, and practice in the field of criminology and associated areas. Dr. Berlin, along with two of our master's level criminal justice students, did an excellent presentation on the Baltimore consent decree that the Baltimore City Police is currently under, and shared their impression of its impact to date. Yesterday, we had several representatives from numerous offices of Inspector General present to our students and discuss pathways career pathways to the investigative field of Inspector General movement. And this week, we also plan to have ATF, FBI, as well as Baltimore County Police and others visit our students to talk about employment opportunities that are available. And we will also have, led by Dr. Rhoden-Trader, a volunteer effort involving our students at Movable Feast. And so we're excited to add on this event as another one of our National Criminal Justice Month activities that puts a spotlight on recent scholarship of Team CJ members. Dr. Rhoden-Trader and I have had the pleasure of participating and contributing to the soon-to-be-released text, Why the Police Should Be Trained by Black People. My colleague, Dr. Darlene Brothers Gray, basically has done an excellent job in her scholarly publication, her book, The Phenomena of Untested Sexual Assault Kits. So you get to hear from her tonight. And also Dr. Michael Berlin, one of our legal expert in residence. He will be speaking about a text that he and Dr. Das and Dr. Wendell Wallace edited and contributed to, Trends in the Judiciary. And the order starting off will be myself, then we will have Dr. Michael Berlin, then you will hear from Dr. Brothers Gray, and then last but not least, Dr. Jacqueline Rhoden-Trader sharing regarding her respective chapter in the book as well. I would be remiss if I did not acknowledge a couple of people, the editor and author, and the kind of the lead. I had the pleasure of also reconnecting with her at ACJS. But our friend and colleague, Dr. Natasha Pratt-Harris, who is at Morgan State University doing excellent work there. And we also have some contributors to the book who are part of the Coppin State University family, Dr. Erica Covington in the College of Business, as well as Dr. Gary Jones in the Department of Social Work, who also were contributors to the text, Why the Police Should Be Trained by Black People. And so we've allotted an hour tonight. And this is just to give you a taste or a sample of what you can expect when you acquire these texts, and to really get you to think about, particularly our students, the research and the scholarship that you're going to advance, be it independently or collectively with a faculty member serving as your mentor and guide. One of the things that excited me about ACJS when we went to the poster sessions, and Dr. Anderson, Dr. Berlin, and myself, was seeing students from all across the country presenting their research. And so next year, the conference, the ACJS conference, will be at National Harbor here in Maryland. And so similar to when the conference was in Baltimore City pre-COVID, we also hope to make our impact in our Coppin impression at National Harbor next year at this conference. And so if you are working on research papers, capstone papers, if you're a junior or senior, you should start to really think about working with faculty to develop your research idea and your poster so you can present it not only at ACJS, but Coppin. We have our own respective faculty student conferences as well, where you can highlight and promote your respective research. And so at this time, what I would like to do is get us started. I know I've said a lot, but I wanted to get us grounded in terms of what you can expect again from us this evening. And I do want to talk a little bit more about a chapter that I was excited to be invited to contribute to. And the chapter from the book, Why the Police Should Be Trained by Black People, was Due Process and Justice in Black Communities. Sharon Jones Eversley, former classmate of mine in Morgan State University's public health program, Dr. Kristen I know I'm not gonna do justice here. Edidoyan Christensen, as we call him, and Lori James Towns and myself worked together with Sharon really taking the lead and in bringing us this collective together so that we could discuss due process and justice in Black communities. And what does that mean? Today, what we see in many instances is injustice. And we see injustice based on fine print media and outside of our own front doors, where there are policing practices that are unconstitutional, and they strain those unconstitutional policing practices, strain the relationship between the police department here in Baltimore and the community. But let me say this, and I do want to qualify, I want to put the statement out there, and I share this here at Coppin and beyond. My belief is that our students can affect change two ways, from the outside and from the inside. And what do I mean by that? Our students can affect positive change in communities, foster healthy and safe communities through acquiring jobs in law enforcement, the courts, the courts and corrections, be it entry level, advanced level, and be influencers, use their social capital, their human capital to affect change, and also believe that we prepare students to be able to be social justice advocates externally and also put pressures on systems where they see gaps. So I'm in the middle in the sense that I believe that we need to have our students prepared to go into these places and spaces where they can make a difference. We need to rise in these agencies. And there's research that shows that when we get jobs in these agencies, we open doors for diversity, equity, and inclusion. But I also believe that we need to hear the voices of those advocates as well. And we do prepare students to be able to lift their voice and amplify the issues in Baltimore City. And so I am, from my perspective, I'm not anti-police. I'm not anti-social justice. I believe that there's a role for law enforcement. There's a role for corrections. There's a role for the courts. And we can influence, our students can influence that change both ways. So what is our chapter focus on? Well, we start out with some thought-provoking questions to get our readers to consider due process and to consider the historic role of law enforcement agencies and how communities of color have seen those agencies. So just a sample of the questions, and you notice I said a sample because I didn't want to give you everything because you need to acquire the text. And we will work with our library to ensure that there are desk copies available for students who want to access it. What are police roles and responsibilities in upholding the law and preventing, investigating, and solving a crime? We also posed the question, what responsibilities do residents have in obeying the law and preventing and reporting a crime? And then we also asked, why is there communal distrust among police, Blacks, and Black communities? And if you want to, feel free to put into the chat your response to any of those respective questions. But we start out not just lecturing, but really posing those thought-provoking questions to get the reader to start to consider the journey that they're going to take in reading through our respective chapter. Just briefly, the chapter sections are as such: overview of police public service programs and community relations attempts. We provide context in reference to that. Most importantly, we talk about we present a public health approach to address health, crime, justice, and safety. And a public health approach looks at violence as a disease. And the major emphasis is on prevention and reduction of harm. And so in criminal justice classes, be it criminological thought or intro to criminal justice, you may have heard us, faculty members, talk about the dark figures of crime, or talk about crime that never makes it to law enforcement. Public health also pays particular attention to ensuring that the community has strategies and means to address not only the crime that's reported or at the tertiary stage, but to go to that primary, secondary stage to prevent or to reduce harm associated with violence. We also discuss the lens of social epidemiology to examine crime in Black communities. And it's important to recognize that we cannot look at criminal justice issues in a vacuum. So I consider myself an epicriminologist. So I intersect between criminal justice and public health. I have a love and passion for both, probably more so for criminal justice and victimology side, but I also appreciate the interplay and the intersection. So if you look at crime and violence in Baltimore City, you can't ignore, if you did a overlap, you would see in the most crime-ridden communities, you would also find, I'm sure, food deserts. You would probably find poor dietary resources and a lack of needs being met in terms of health and mental health. You would probably find challenges with schools. And so these other factors of influence, public health says, is just as important and can impact crime and violence in our communities. So you can't just treat health issues, mental health, food and diet, housing, and homelessness in a vacuum and ignore its connection to criminal justice, because we know if there's less resources for young people in those areas I just mentioned, they can be fast-tracked into delinquency. And so what we attempt to do between criminal justice and public health is to look at a healthy as well as safe community. So the lens of public health, the lens of social epidemiology allows us to dive further into the weeds to understand factors that may influence police-community relations that are embedded in our communities. And just as an FYI, social epidemiology seeks to understand the ways in which social, political, cultural, and economic circumstances influences our chances for a healthy life. And we also discuss in our text, in our chapter, Citizen Science, a strategy to sustain civility between police and Black communities, which I'll touch on. We provide a chapter summary and conclusion, and also end as we began with thought-provoking questions for the reader to ponder. So I just want to briefly read an excerpt, because the point of interest that I want to highlight before I pass the baton to my colleague is the aspect of citizen science. And I'm just going to read directly. This is a quote from, quoted directly from the chapter. Citizen science, a strategy to sustain civility between police and Black communities. It is an emerging open science phenomena of the mid-1990s that addresses and researches priority community issues identified by community residents. Like community-based participatory research, a popular equity community engagement method, citizen science is also a community-centered participatory science. Many residents and lay volunteers have often complained that science was exclusively accessible to the intellectual elite who did not value their expertise and experiences. In citizen science, residents are community experts with vast lived experience. They possess valuable experiences-based knowledge and relevant expertise about their community. Hence, in citizen science, educational degrees and professional title formalizations are completely absent, discouraged, and not prerequisite for community research participation. It's simply a group of concerned and engaged residents and stakeholders who merge their experiences and expertise to conduct scientific research modeling of the following methods: observing, questioning, planning, analyzing, and communicating. In citizen science, data are gathered, outcomes are analyzed, and research findings are published for wide dissemination. In Black communities, citizen science has been successfully used as a comprehensive social justice tool to change environmental policies, laws, programming, and communal practices. And as you can see by the figure, it's a collaborative between communities and the police. Oftentimes, the community may feel as though they don't have a voice in policies or processes that impact their daily life. And to acquire buy-in, particularly in communities where there's distrust, citizen science provides an opportunity to come to the table and to collaboratively share ideas and develop strategies that can be impactful to all. Now, that does not mean in citizen science that law enforcement loses its ability to police or to hold people accountable. But what it does mean is that there is opportunity for inclusion of important community stakeholder voices in activities that are relevant to community and police. And so I believe that the thing our chapter uplifts the most, not just looking at the history, such as looking at different programs that could be of value, past and present, such as the Police Athletic League, Officer Friendly. There are a range of different programs that we highlight that we believe can still play a critical role today with the appropriate funding, support, and resources. So in conclusion, community relations are viewed in the context of community residents, past and present, current lived experience. Unjust and dehumanizing events that have negatively shaped the police community perception can't be minimized and overlooked while improving community relations. Unfortunately, unconstitutional policing and disparate treatment of Black residents, particularly in underserved and impoverished communities of color, can serve as barriers to establishing dialogues and building strong police and community bonds. The programs highlighted in our respective chapter provide traditional and emergent frameworks in which partnership building can occur. And in closing, police and community residents must be willing to acknowledge the pain associated with improper and illegal police conduct and move forward based on lessons learned. So again, chapter 3 from our respective texts, Why the Police Should Be Trained by Black People, which centers on due process and justice in Black communities, is what I've just shared. And I hope that when the book is released in April, you all will find it appropriate to purchase a copy or to gather a copy from our library. It's going to have some great information in it, not just from our Coppin family and our Morgan family, but other critical thinkers as well who helped to contribute to this chapter. And again, you will hear more from Dr. Rhoden-Trader regarding her contribution at the latter part of this presentation. So now I'm going to stop presenting and pass the baton to, I believe, my colleague, Dr. Michael Berlin.
Greetings. It is a pleasure to be here. You get to see my messy house in the background, nicknamed Hamden Manor. I've been living here many, many years. let me see if I can share my screen. I just made a tiny little PowerPoint to get started to talk about the volume, and then I'm going to talk about my interview. So let's see if I can pull this off and have it work properly. Okay. Let me see. All right, can you guys see my screen?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, I edited a volume along with Wendell Wallace, who's a colleague and a professor at the University of the West Indies in Trinidad, along with Dr. Das, who is a professor in our department. And this was one of a series of interview books, Trends in the Judiciary, interviews with judges across the globe. And this was volume 4. I'd written some contributions for previous volumes, including with Judge Bell, who was the first African-American judge of the Court of Appeals, which is our state Supreme Court. And I had actually practiced law with Judge Bell years ago. Well, not in front of Judge Bell years ago. And Judge Hurd, who I interviewed for this volume, is somewhat of a contemporary in terms of we went to law school at roughly the same time. So this is one of a series of volumes that Dr. Das has been published through the International Police Executive Symposium of the years. The initial volume started out with Trends in Policing, interviews with law enforcement leaders. He's also published interviews with correctional leaders. And then there's also a volume of lawyers and advocates. But as far as interviewing judges is concerned, these are judges and justices from around the world. And they come from a variety of courts, from the trial courts of limited jurisdiction, which would be something like the Maryland District Court, to the courts of general jurisdiction, the Circuit Court, to a variety of specialty courts, drug courts, mental health courts, to intermediate appellate courts, such as the Court of Special Appeals, and then state or provincial Supreme Courts, also the federal courts and national Supreme Courts. So a wide variety of judges and justices at different levels. The volumes tend to be heavier toward the appellate levels, state Supreme Court levels, provincial courts, and national courts, but also very valuable to interview trial judges, which sort of in a vernacular is where most of the action occurs, is where the trials occur. For the most part, appeals are appeals as of record based on the transcripts and legal arguments that judges below made some kind of an error. So I found it particularly interesting to interview Judge Hurd, who was the first African-American woman who became the chief judge of the Baltimore City Circuit Court, one of the busiest in the United States. At the beginning of each of the chapters, we provide an overview of the court structures and legal systems of the different countries. The countries are very, very different from the United States that spans a continent, to some of the smaller countries like Bosnia-Herzegovina in Eastern Europe, to countries like India, countries in Africa, and Asia. So very, very different countries, backgrounds, cultures, and legal systems. I'm most familiar practicing in the US with the common law system coming from early England. The civil law system comes from continental Europe. It provides generally a more active role for the judge. They're sometimes called an inquisitorial system, where the judge plays a much more active role in the case. The common law system is an adversarial system where the judge is an arbiter between the parties. The interviews themselves are based on an interview schedule with a series of questions to explore, but then freedom to go into depth in areas where the judge says something particularly interesting or that we want to explore further. We asked them about their career path, the changes that they've experienced in their time on the bench. Many of the judges have served for 20 years, in some cases more, some a little less. Their philosophy and for the role of courts in society, most difficult problems, successful policies and programs. In particular, the relationship between theory, research, and practice. This actually can be a tough question for some judges, because most judges simply think in terms of legal theory and legal research, but many of the younger judges are much more aware of the social science research and how it impacts, say, for example, the drug courts and sentencing. So depending upon the background and experience of the judge, the relationship between theory and practice can be a tough one, because there's legal theory and then there's social science theory. And finally, transnational relations. In the US, for the most part, trial court judges have very limited experience or limited exposure to transnational relations. There are immigrants, legal and illegal, who are in the court system, and it can have special implications for them. But for the most part, most judging at the trial level and the appellate levels in the US involve questions of state and federal law and very little transnational. However, things like September 11th, 2001 have impacted the court system and the laws in terms of national security issues. So that is a very brief overview. Let me exit. Let me exit the sharing mode here. All right. I think I'm now out of sharing mode. Is that correct?
That's correct.
All right, good. And let me tell you a little bit about Judge Hurd. Also, to throw in a plug, especially for Mr. Davis, who I see with us, and potentially for others. Judge Hurd is going to be appearing on campus this Thursday evening, and is a guest speaker along with Chanel White, a local attorney and adjunct faculty member, at my graduate seminar class in criminal justice administration at 5:30 on Thursday. So for those interested, and Mr. Bay might be interested as well, along with any faculty, Judge Hurd is the first African-American woman to become Chief Judge of the Circuit Court for Baltimore City. She has an absolutely fascinating legal career, as well as personal insights into Baltimore. She actually came with her father, who became an assistant school superintendent in Baltimore in the 70s. She originally came to Baltimore with her family in the late 60s or early 70s, and experienced, I suppose it would be fair to say, culture shock coming to Baltimore from growing up in Long Island, New York. But she liked Baltimore and Maryland well enough that she decided to come back to law school in Maryland. and she went to the University of Maryland Law School, graduated, became a state's attorney in Baltimore, subsequently an assistant U.S. attorney in the Virgin Islands, which is one of the posts that she absolutely loved the most. She briefly went to Orlando as an executive assistant U.S. attorney, and later went on to, before becoming a circuit court judge, she served a brief stint in Orlando as an executive assistant U.S. attorney, in part on loan to the U.S. Attorney's Office in Washington, D.C., where she played a role in implementation of the federal weed and seed program. And she has a very interesting perspective on the relationship between law, justice, and the public and community interactions. And it's a kind of unique perspective of the value and importance of interacting with the community, but also of certain kinds of targeted enforcement, which when coupled with community work can really make for safer, healthier communities. And so she's got a very interesting perspective. She has no tolerance for poor policing. During the Freddie Gray trial, for example, which she did not handle, she had another case involving a white officer who shot a white suspect in the groin after he was already on the ground. She said, it was interesting. It never made the news, but she sent the officer to jail for 10 years for the aggravated assault. Really pretty interesting. She was kind of famous for her role in the Adnan Syed case, which is the subject of the podcast. So she's had a number of high-profile cases. And I just want to read a little excerpt about her role as a judge. I'm going to need a little more light here, so bear with me. I'm just going to plug an extra light in, and I will be right back with us. All right, 1 second, because I'm not going to be able to read this without some more light. All right, let there be light, and okay. So, this is our personal judicial philosophy. What do you think should be the role of the judiciary in society? What should be their job, functions, and roles? I kind of think I answered that early on when I talked to you about being committed to the community that they serve, not forgetting that you are appointed to or elected to resolve disputes, whether they be civil or criminal. There are events that have occurred in our society where laws have been broken or alleged to have been broken, or a victim has been harmed or alleged to have been harmed, where a defendant is the perpetrator or alleged to be the co-perpetrator. These issues cannot be resolved without an independent judiciary being involved in the oversight of a trial. It's the jury or for decision making, or it's the jury or the decision making once a jury or the trier of fact determines guilt or innocence. In civil matters, the same is true. A plaintiff has a complaint that something has occurred, violating some law or some right. An injustice has occurred, some law has been broken, and they are harmed or about to be harmed in the case of a request for an injunction. And the judge serves as the independent, objective arbiter of the dispute. Again, if it's a jury trial, that both The rights of the plaintiff and the defendant are protected and preserved. Your duty is to the community you serve, to the Constitution of the United States, the laws of the state of Maryland, and the rule of law. I think that what many judges forget is that they should not be descending from the clouds or from some lofty place to impart wisdom, but rather that they should be coming from a place in the community to impart justice. And I'm going to expand on that a tiny bit further without reading. And that is that one way that Judge Heard viewed her role a little differently than she said many judges do is that she really believed in following up on the cases. That when somebody was on probation, she tended to play a very active role in the probation, making sure that they got the services that were court ordered, that there was appropriate follow-up. And so she really saw an expanded role in terms of particularly making sure that defendants on probation were getting what they needed so that they didn't come back into the system or to make it increasingly likely. So she really saw that as part of her job and sort of commented that many judges didn't feel quite the same way, but that she was definitely involved in her cases. On the issue of race and gender in the courts, she said certainly there are a lot more African Americans and more women than before, but she still didn't feel it was a level playing field per se, that she still felt that she was treated differently on occasion because of race and or gender, but recognized that there had been tremendous strides, particularly in the state courts, not necessarily in the federal court in Maryland. I think the first African-American woman was just appointed a judge in the federal court, as well as Ketanji Jackson now, who's going through the nomination process for the U.S. Supreme Court. So I think Judge Heard would say things are certainly better for women and minorities, but we're not there yet. So on that note, I will end. And again, if you really want to have a fascinating experience, come Thursday evening, and you're free to ask Judge Heard questions directly to her. So thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Berlin. We appreciate that snapshot and overview. And of course, I'm excited about Thursday. I'm going to have to figure out a way. I have a meeting that I'm going to be in, but I'm just going to have to break the rules and sneak through and come check you all out. And so again, thank you. At this juncture, our next person up to bat is Dr. Darlene Brothers Gray. I've had the opportunity to watch Dr. Brothers Gray develop her research around this exciting and important topic that is central to victim justice and victim safety. But I'm going to let her share her thoughts. And, I'm particularly proud because, she has her first book. So it's something to be applauded. And so I'm going to pass the baton to you, Dr. Brothers Gray, so you can do a reading and share about your respective book and research.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Rice. Let me see if I can bring it up. Okay, so are you able to see it?
Yes, I see. I said summary, and then it shows yeah.
Okay, so My dissertation was titled Perceptions of University Law Enforcement Officials Regarding Unsubmitted, Untested Sexual Assault Kits. I wrote a proposal to Cambridge Scholars Publishing and it was accepted. And so the only thing they had me change was the title. So the title now is The Phenomenon of Untested Sexual Assault Kits. Sexual assault nurse examiners use sexual assault kits to collect evidence from sexual assault victims and pass them to law enforcement officials. However, many sexual assault kits remain unsubmitted and untested once in police custody. With such evidence, law enforcement officials cannot apprehend perpetrators of sexual assault. And one of the quotes in the book was, "A growing body of research indicates that thousands of sexual assault kits do not reach the crime lab for processing, instead remaining in police property evidence rooms. The lack of processing completed sexual assault kits is a United States-wide phenomenon that presents obstacles to providing justice to victims of sexual assault." The Metoo Movement. The initial Metoo movement was started by Tarana Burke. A woman had disclosed to her that her mother's boyfriend had been sexually assaulting her. For Burke, the version of Me Too is a way to help survivors feel seen and heard while providing empathy as they take personal risks in disclosing their experiences. The second Me Too movement occurred after the public declarations of sexual assault and the harassment of Harvey Weinstein. Actress and activist Alyssa Milano tweeted "Me Too" after a friend suggested that all women who had experienced sexual assault and harassment to tweet the words to provide people with a sense of the severity of the issue of sexual assault. Milano replied to the tweet and asked others to follow suit. In the days that passed, celebrities, actors, musicians, athletes, and other public figures chimed in on the Me Too movement. For the methodology for the book, the generic qualitative inquiry approach was the best choice for the study, as it provided the opportunity to explore the participants' individual thoughts, attitudes, and opinions, or likeliness on their experiences of things in the outside world. Generic qualitative inquiry was the means of exploring why many officials do not test sexual assault kits in police custody, and to assess the perceptions of 10 university police officers in 2 Middle Atlantic University police departments. So the sample consisted of 10 sworn university law enforcement officers serving 2 Middle Atlantic state universities, and their qualifications to participate in the survey, the study was, they had to be 21 years of age or older. They had to identify as being a university law enforcement officer, and they had to have at least 1 year experience investigating sexual assault kits. Semi-structured interviews were conducted in person. The data was digitally recorded and transcribed, and the results were elicited experiences of the law enforcement officers. There were 5 research questions with the study. 2 elicited results. The other 3 only gave general information that was used in the book. So the research question 1 was, what are university law enforcement officials' perceptions of barriers that could cause processing delays with the sexual assault kits? The findings was the lack of resources, which could be finances and manpower, were significant factors as to why sexual assault kits may have been submitted but untested. Other theories that were used in the study were feminism, functionalism, and resource dependence theory. But the resource dependence theory was most applicable because agencies that have adequate resources are able to process sexual assault kits in a reasonable amount of time, while agencies that do not are limited in both time and qualified individuals who process sexual assault kits. Research question 2 was, what are university law enforcement officials' perceptions of the impact of the unsubmitted and untested sexual assault kits on offender accountability? The findings were untested evidence leads to fewer apprehensions and arrests of individuals that may be repeat offenders of this type of crime. In summary, the research shows that the provisions of resources, finances, manpower is necessary to reduce single and recurring sexual assault crimes and to promote the proper functions of the criminal justice system, collective engagement of members of society, and equal values of its citizens, regardless of gender. There is also a need for stakeholders to collectively engage, acknowledge the systematic gaps, and provide resolution so that officials properly utilize sexual assault kits to apprehend offenders and empower victims to live healthy and functional lives. And that's it. And I'm going to pass it on to Dr. Rhoden-Trader.
Great job, Dr. Brothers Gray. And also, just as an FYI, I am, working with Dr. Brothers Gray, so we can try to do some additional original research and bring together some national experts to further explore this issue. And so kudos to you, and I appreciate the information that you provided, and thank you for my book.
Thank you.
So next up, we have Dr. Rhoden-Trader.
Hi.
And you may have to unshare your screen, Dr. Brothers Gray.
Pleasant good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Drs. Rice, Berlin, and Brothers Gray for your presentation. I'm waiting for Dr. Brothers Gray to unshare so that I can share my.
How do I unshare it?
Pardon?
How do I unshare it?
You should see at the
Click
top.
the share button, which is at the top right.
Yeah.
Next to the leave sign, you just click it.
Okay, I did.
And it didn't do anything. Okay, well, not going to worry about it. Alrighty, perhaps you'll figure it out by the time I finish, and then I'll put up my thing. So anyway, pleasant good evening, everyone. I had the pleasure of serving as the author of the first chapter of the textbook, Why the Police Should Be Trained by Black People. And I wrote that chapter with Dr. Bahia Mohammed of Howard University. And I'm very proud of Dr. Natasha Pratt-Harris, who serves as the editor for that publication. Chapter 1 is titled Black Criminology and Criminal Justice 101. And what we'll find in criminology, which studies the etiology of crime, is that there aren't many Black voices in the field. Textbooks are written by majority academics, and we believe it is somewhat skewed. Relative to Thank you so much. All right, so within the chapter for this book, Dr. Mohammed and myself triangulate the importance of police community incidences that have served as reminders of why there is a need for a new paradigm shifting and evidence-based theoretical approaches to police training. To properly understand those incidences and the need to examine them within police training, one needs to examine the historical underpinnings of Blacks, their interactions with law enforcement, and structural racism. Those issues have kept Blacks enslaved with the American criminal justice system. Social unrest is put in context based on incidences before and after the unlawful death of George Floyd on May 25th of 2020. They are indeed comparable and competing examples that contextualize police community incidences and are analyzed and presented through a critical race lens. Blacks, particularly Black men, have been killed by police since the establishment of the first official American police force in Boston, Massachusetts in 1838. American policing was a reimagining of slave patrols and were legally able to arrest, detain, and subsequently incarcerate Black men who, by the 13th Amendment, were legally the property of the state. Some died while in police custody due to the use of lethal force. In the postmodern era, the names of several have become the catalyst for a movement that has forced the birth of the transformation of American policing. Although laws have been enacted, regrettably little has changed. So when you think about Black criminology, the study of the etiology or origin of crime that sheds light on who, what, why, and where of crime and predicts certain crimes, there are several sub-areas of criminology, and these birth an understanding of the origin of crime, explanations for who commit crimes, and when and where they were committed. Sociology of Law, a sub-area of criminology, is concerned with the role that social forces play in shaping criminal law and the role of criminal law in shaping society. When you think of the historical context of social structure and classical criminological theories, which are steeped in the whole way in which police respond or react and are trained across the United States, we have to look historically at, let's say, the 1960s, and the Civil Rights Movement, when lynching, police brutality, a rise of gangs, an influx of drugs into urban communities, the Vietnam War, the urban flight, all played significant roles in the social unrest and distrust of law enforcement. The Civil Rights Movement was deemed successful, and in the 1970s, rights were granted, but at a price. The breakdown of the Black family, intraracial segregation, the Black bourgeoisie versus the poor, left the downtrodden to fend for themselves. This resulted in hopelessness, more Blacks in need of public housing, and dehumanizing effects. Blacks criminalized due to their social location were heavily policed and harassed. Many returned from serving their country only to be called a nigger and were unable to find stable employment. Social structural theory and law enforcement approaches to policing Blacks, testing out these theories. A large percentage of the acts of intra-racial violence among Blacks are occurring in urban cities struggling with poverty, blighted housing, substance abuse, and educational challenges. Hence, the physical environment of Blacks and the policies and systemic racism that fosters such should be factored into the discussion of crime. It is easy to use one social class as an explanation for crime. However, the historical underpinnings embedded in the social fabric of American society must be addressed. Therefore, for law enforcement training paradigm imperative to be realized, specifically mistrust, excessive force, economic conditions, race and class inequality, as well as multiple criminological theories, social structure, rational choice, and defensible space from the lens of Black criminologists, coupled with the sanctity of life and implementation of cultural sensitivity training are a must. At the end of our chapter, we ask poignant queries and discussion opportunities for the readers and users of the text. For example, when social scientists say that crime is a social construction, what exactly do they mean? How can the theories discussed in this chapter support police use of force in Black communities? Do you think it is important for law enforcement officers and officials to learn how criminology and criminal justice lead to the perpetuation of negative stereotypes of Black and brown people? If so, why or why not? I trust that you and your students will find the book favorable, will adopt it for your classrooms, and we're looking forward to its publication in a couple of days. Thank you very much. And if you like, I can share the picture now. Oh, no, I can't.
No, try to share it, Dr. Rhoden-Trader. I just want to see if it works. I was trying to do a couple things on my end. I just want to see if it may or may not, but I'm just curious.
Let's see. All right, one moment. Perhaps. Okay.
There we go.
All right. So this was a poster prepared in December for the launch of the textbook. The editor, Dr. Brett Harris, created this. And so we are now in April, 4 months have passed. It is published by Routledge and Taylor, Routledge by Taylor and Francis, And as it says here, I am a contributor and the first chapter, Black Criminology and Criminal Justice 101. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Rhoden-Trader, and I appreciate your patience as we have navigated our tech. And I want to thank all of our presenters. Do any of our students or guests have any questions they want to add before we formally close out? Looks like I see some comments here. Dr. Anderson is getting ready to type another one of our Team CJ members. You are more than welcome, Dr. Anderson. And again, this is also just one opportunity for our students. Hopefully it spurred your thought to consider, how to further explore research questions that you may have, but also connecting those research questions to priorities in the community and priorities at our university, and look at ways that you can use your skills to affect change in a positive way. To my colleagues, Dr. Brothers Gray, Dr. Rhoden-Trader, Dr. Berlin, I appreciate your scholarship. I think iron sharpens iron, and we each kind of feed and build off of each other, and we push each other to continue, no matter how busy we are, to find time and space for meaningful, intentional scholarship. So on this note, I want to thank you all. I want to thank you for what you've done for National Criminal Justice Month, what you continue to plan to do. For those who were on here earlier, Dr. Berlin, again, will be hosting. Professor Attorney Chanel White, Coppin, proud Common, distinguished Coppin alum, as well as Judge Hurd. And so we're excited about that, and the volunteer opportunity being led by Dr. Rhoden-Trader at Movable Feast, and our student participation in that. So I'm going to, Dr. Zhang is going to have the last word. Let's see what Dr. Zhang is. All right, thank you, Dr. Zhang. And next, our next one, Dr. Zhang, we plan to see you and Dr. Anderson in the mix, and then Dr. Berlin and Dr. Rhoden-Trader and myself and Brothers Gray, we're going to be in the chat and let you all lead it. Everyone, have a great evening. We plan to share this video for those who were unable to attend on our Facebook page, and you can access via our Instagram link, so that you can stay connected and share this with other students and other Coppin family community members as well. Thank you again, everyone. Have a great remainder of your day.
Thank you. Great to see everybody.